The noose swayed gently in the morning breeze outside the jailhouse window, and Natalie Kendrick knew it was meant for her neck come Friday morning unless someone proved what she already knew to be true. She was innocent of murder. The year was 1878, and White Oaks, New Mexico Territory, had just experienced its first real scandal since silver was discovered in the nearby hills 2 years prior. Margaret Harrison, the wife of the wealthiest mine owner in town, had been found dead in her bedroom 3 days ago with a bottle of poison beside her teacup. The same teacup Natalie had delivered from the bakery where she worked, the same teacup she had carried up the servants' stairs and placed on Margaret's bedside table with her own 2 hands. Those hands now gripped the cold iron bars of her cell as she stared out at the dusty street below. She was 22 years old, an orphan who had come west from Missouri 2 years earlier seeking a new life after both her parents succumbed to fever. White Oaks had seemed like a promise back then, a place where a young woman could make an honest living and perhaps find a husband among the miners and ranchers. Instead, she found herself accused of poisoning the one woman in town who had ever shown her genuine kindness. Margaret had often ordered extra pastries from the bakery just to give Natalie a generous tip, had smiled at her in church when others looked past her threadbare dresses, had once even invited her to tea, though propriety and Mr. Harrison's stern disapproval had prevented that meeting from ever taking place. The trial was set for Thursday, giving her exactly 1 day to find salvation. Sheriff Porter was a fair man, but the evidence was damning. The poison had been in the tea she delivered. Her fingerprints were on the cup. And worst of all, someone claimed to have seen her lingering outside the Harrison mansion that evening, though Natalie had gone straight home after her delivery, same as always. She heard boots on the wooden stairs leading up to the cells. Sheriff Porter appeared with his usual weathered expression, his gray mustache drooping in the oppressive heat. Behind him stood a man Natalie had seen around town but never spoken to. He was tall, perhaps 6 feet, with dark hair that curled slightly at his collar and eyes the color of strong coffee. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt slung low on his hips, the leather worn smooth from use. "Miss Kendrick," Sheriff Porter said, his voice gentle despite the circumstances. "This here is Isaac Anderson. He's asked to speak with you." Isaac Anderson removed his hat, revealing more of his sun-bronzed face. He appeared to be in his late 20s, maybe 28 or 29, with the lean build of a man who spent his days in the saddle. "Madam," he said, his voice a low rumble that somehow made her feel less alone despite everything. "I wonder if you might answer some questions for me." Natalie straightened her spine, smoothing down her worn calico dress as best she could. "Are you a lawman, Mr. Anderson?" "No, madam. I work as a ranch hand for the Circle T spread north of town. But I was in the Harrison house the evening Mrs. Harrison died, and I saw some things that do not sit right with my conscience." Hope flickered in Natalie's chest like the first spark of a campfire. "What things?" Isaac stepped closer to the bars, close enough that she could smell leather and sage on his clothes. "I was there delivering a horse Mr. Harrison had purchased. I saw you come in with your delivery basket, watched you go up the back stairs. But I also saw someone else go up those same stairs not 15 minutes after you left. A man I did not recognize, moving like he did not want to be seen." Sheriff Porter crossed his arms. "You did not mention this before, Anderson." "Because I was not certain it mattered until I heard the accusations against Miss Kendrick. I know her character, Sheriff. She attends church every Sunday, works honest hours at the bakery, and has never caused a moment of trouble. The story being told does not match the woman I have observed from a distance." Natalie felt heat rise in her cheeks. Isaac Anderson had noticed her. She tried to recall seeing him in church, but could only remember keeping her eyes down during services, too aware of her shabby clothes and lone status among families and couples. "Can you describe this man?" the sheriff asked. "Average height, wearing a black coat despite the heat, hat pulled low. He moved with purpose, like he knew exactly where he was going. I thought perhaps he was a business associate of Mr. Harrison's, so I paid it little mind at the time. But now, knowing what happened, I believe he needs to be found and questioned." The sheriff rubbed his jaw thoughtfully. "That is not much to go on, Anderson. Could have been anyone. Which is why I need to investigate further before the trial tomorrow. But I wanted Miss Kendrick to know she is not without allies." Isaac's dark eyes met hers through the bars, and something passed between them, a connection as real as the iron separating their bodies. "I believe you are innocent, madam, and I intend to prove it." Tears stung Natalie's eyes, the first she had allowed herself to shed since her arrest. "Why would you do this for me? You do not even know me." "I know enough," Isaac said simply, "and I know injustice when I see it. A woman's life should not be taken on circumstantial evidence when questions remain unanswered." After Isaac and the sheriff left, Natalie sat on her narrow cot and allowed herself to think about something other than the noose for the first time in 3 days. She thought about Isaac Anderson's steady gaze, the conviction in his voice, the way he had said he had observed her character. In the wild, often lawless territory of New Mexico, where women were scarce and men plentiful, she had learned to be wary of male attention. But there had been nothing predatory in Isaac's manner, only a quiet strength that made her want to trust him. The afternoon dragged on, the heat in the cell becoming oppressive as the sun moved across the sky. Natalie dozed fitfully, dreaming of poison and nooses and dark eyes that promised salvation. Evening brought Isaac back, this time without the sheriff. The deputy on duty, young Billy Morrison, seemed to know Isaac well and allowed him to approach the cell with a lantern as shadows gathered in the corners. "I have been asking questions around town," Isaac said without preamble. "Mr. Harrison has been surprisingly unhelpful. He claims to have been in Santa Fe on business the day his wife died, did not return until the following morning." "That is what I heard as well," Natalie said, moving closer to the bars. "They say he was devastated. They say many things. But I spoke to a clerk at the assayer's office who mentioned that Mr. Harrison had been arguing with his wife about money. Seems Mrs. Harrison wanted to donate a substantial sum to build a school for the Mexican children on the south side of town. Mr. Harrison opposed it." "Margaret mentioned that to me once," Natalie said softly. "She said education was the greatest gift one could give. She was a good woman, Mr. Anderson. She did not deserve what happened to her." "I agree, which is why I am going to find out who really poisoned her." He paused, then added, "May I ask you something personal, Miss Kendrick? Given my circumstances, I suppose privacy is a luxury I can no longer afford." A hint of a smile touched his lips, softening his serious expression. "Did Mrs. Harrison ever mention being afraid of anyone? Did she seem worried in the days before her death?" Natalie thought back to her last conversation with Margaret Harrison, just 2 days before the poisoning. They had spoken briefly at the bakery when Margaret came in to place her regular order. She seemed distracted, actually. Kept looking over her shoulder like she expected someone to be there. When I asked if she was well, she said something strange. She said, "Sometimes the people we trust most are the ones we should fear." I did not understand what she meant. Isaac's expression grew intense. "That could be significant. She may have discovered something about someone close to her." "But who?" Mr. Harrison was in Santa Fe. Their son is back east at university. They had few close friends beyond business associates. "What about servants, staff?" "They had a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who has been with them for years, and a man who handled the grounds and horses, but I do not recall his name. Robert Fletcher, Isaac supplied. I met him when I delivered the horse. Unfriendly fellow, would not make eye contact, said he had worked for the Harrisons for about 6 months. Something in his tone made Natalie lean closer. You suspect him? I suspect everyone at this point. But yes, something about Fletcher struck me as off. He was nervous, kept looking toward the house while I was there. At the time, I thought he was just anxious to get back to work. Now I wonder if it was something else. How can you investigate all of this before tomorrow? The trial begins at 9 o'clock. Isaac reached through the bars and before Natalie could react, gently took her hand. His palm was rough with calluses, warm and solid. I will not let them hang an innocent woman, Miss Kendrick. You have my word as a man of honor. The touch, brief as it was, sent something electric through Natalie's body. She had held so few hands in her life, had known so little physical affection since her parents died. This simple gesture from a near stranger felt like an anchor in a storm. Thank you, she whispered. I do not know what I did to deserve your faith in me, but I am grateful for it. You do not have to do anything to deserve basic human decency, Isaac said. That should be freely given. He released her hand, and she felt the loss of his warmth immediately. I will return tomorrow before the trial. Try to rest, Miss Kendrick. After he left, Natalie lay on her cot and stared at the ceiling, her hand still tingling where Isaac had touched her. She wondered what his story was, why a ranch hand would involve himself so deeply in a murder case. Most men in White Oaks were too busy chasing silver or survival to concern themselves with justice for a poor baker's assistant. The night passed slowly. Natalie heard the sounds of the town settling into sleep. Piano music from the saloons, laughter and shouting, the occasional gunshot that made her flinch. She thought about her parents, wondered what they would make of her situation. Her father had been a practical man, a farmer who believed in hard work and honest dealing. Her mother had been gentler, a woman who saw the best in people even when they disappointed her. Natalie liked to think she had inherited qualities from both, but right now, her mother's optimism felt like a luxury she could not afford. Morning came with harsh sunlight and the sound of hammering. Natalie forced herself not to think about what they might be building in preparation for her execution. She washed her face in the basin the deputy brought, tried to make herself presentable for the trial. Her dress was wrinkled from sleeping in it, her hair a tangled mess, but she did her best to braid it neatly. At 8 o'clock, Isaac arrived. He looked like he had not slept, his face drawn with exhaustion, but there was something triumphant in his eyes. I found him, he said immediately. Fletcher. He left town last night in a hurry, but I tracked him to an abandoned line shack about 10 miles north. He is currently tied up and waiting to be transported back to White Oaks. Did he confess? Not yet. But when I searched his belongings, I found a substantial amount of cash that a groundskeeper should not have, and a letter. Isaac pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. It is from someone instructing Fletcher to take care of the problem and promising payment. The letter is not signed, but I have my suspicions about who wrote it. Who? Let's save that for the courtroom. Sheriff Porter is bringing Fletcher in now. Your trial is going to be very interesting, Miss Kendrick. The White Oaks Courthouse was a simple wooden building that also served as the town meeting hall. When Natalie was led in by the sheriff, her wrists thankfully free of shackles, she saw that nearly every seat was filled. News of a murder trial had drawn people from all over the territory. She recognized faces from church, from the bakery, from her simple daily life. Some looked at her with pity, others with barely concealed contempt. She kept her head high, refusing to give them the satisfaction of seeing her fear. Isaac sat in the front row, his hat on his knee, his expression calm and confident. When their eyes met, he gave her a small nod of encouragement. That simple gesture gave her the strength to walk to the defendant's table without stumbling. The judge was Horace Pemberton, a circuit judge who traveled between several towns in the territory. He was a stern-looking man in his 60s with silver hair and sharp eyes that seemed to miss nothing. The prosecutor was Thomas Whitney, a lawyer from Santa Fe who had been specially retained by Mr. Harrison to see justice done for his wife's murder. Natalie had no lawyer. She could not afford one, and none had volunteered to defend her. But when she took her seat, Isaac stood up from the gallery. "Your Honor," he said, his voice carrying clearly through the room, "I would like to request permission to speak on behalf of the defendant." Judge Pemberton frowned. "Are you a lawyer, Mr. Anderson?" "No, Your Honor. But I have information pertinent to this case, and Miss Kendrick has no legal representation. I am simply asking for the opportunity to present evidence that may exonerate her." Whitney stood immediately. "Your Honor, this is highly irregular. Mr. Anderson is not an officer of the court. He has no legal standing to represent the defendant." "He does not have to be a lawyer to present evidence, Mr. Whitney," the judge said. "This is a frontier court, and we operate with some flexibility when it comes to procedure. I will allow Mr. Anderson to speak, though the burden of proof remains with the prosecution." He looked at Natalie. "Miss Kendrick, do you consent to Mr. Anderson speaking on your behalf?" "Yes, Your Honor," Natalie said, her voice stronger than she felt. "I do." The trial began with Whitney laying out the prosecution's case. He described how Natalie had delivered tea to Mrs. Harrison, how the poison had been found in that tea, how Natalie had the means and opportunity to commit the murder. He suggested that Natalie, a poor orphan, might have been jealous of Mrs. Harrison's wealth and position, or perhaps had stolen something from the house and killed Mrs. Harrison to cover her crime. It all sounded so damning when presented that way. Natalie watched the faces of the townspeople and saw belief settling into their expressions. They wanted to believe she was guilty. It made the world simpler, more comprehensible. Then Isaac stood to present his case. He moved to the front of the room with the easy confidence of a man comfortable in his own skin. Natalie found herself watching the way he carried himself, the way his hands moved as he spoke, the conviction in every word. "Your Honor, members of this community, I stand before you today not as a lawyer, but as a witness to truth. I was at the Harrison home on the evening Mrs. Harrison was poisoned. I delivered a horse to Mr. Harrison and was present in the stable yard for approximately 1 hour. During that time, I observed Miss Kendrick arrive with her delivery basket, enter through the servant's entrance, and leave approximately 10 minutes later. She looked exactly as she always did, respectful, efficient, professional." He paused, letting his words settle. "But I also saw something else. 15 minutes after Miss Kendrick left, another person entered the house through the same servant's entrance. A man wearing a black coat, moving furtively. At the time, I assumed he was a business associate of Mr. Harrison's. Now I know different." Isaac gestured to Sheriff Porter, who stood and escorted a man into the courtroom. Natalie recognized Robert Fletcher, the groundskeeper. He looked haggard and frightened, his hands bound in front of him. "This is Robert Fletcher," Isaac continued. "He worked for the Harrisons for 6 months. Last night, after I made it known I was investigating Mrs. Harrison's death, Fletcher fled town. I tracked him down and found in his possession $500 in cash, and this letter." He handed the letter to Judge Pemberton. "The letter instructs Fletcher to take care of the problem and promises payment upon completion of the task." A murmur ran through the courtroom. Judge Pemberton read the letter, his expression growing grave. "This letter is not signed. Do you know who wrote it?" I have a theory, Your Honor. But first, I would like to call Fletcher to testify. Fletcher was sworn in, looking like he might be sick at any moment. Whitney objected strenuously, but Judge Pemberton overruled him, clearly intrigued by where Isaac was heading. "Mr. Fletcher," Isaac said, "did you poison Mrs. Margaret Harrison?" Fletcher's eyes darted around the room like a trapped animal. "I want immunity. I want a guarantee that I will not hang." Judge Pemberton leaned forward. "That is not within my power to promise, but your cooperation will be taken into consideration during sentencing. However, if you stay silent and the truth comes out anyway, you will have earned no mercy. Choose wisely." Fletcher swallowed hard. "I put the poison in her tea, but I did not want to. I was paid to do it, told that if I did not, my family back in Kansas would be harmed. I have a wife and 2 little girls. I could not risk them." The courtroom erupted. Natalie felt her knees go weak with relief. Judge Pemberton banged his gavel until order was restored. "Who paid you?" Isaac asked. "Who threatened your family?" Fletcher's voice dropped to almost a whisper. "Mr. Harrison. Charles Harrison paid me to kill his wife." The reaction was immediate and explosive. People shouted, several stood up, and one woman near the back fainted. Judge Pemberton's gavel banged repeatedly. "Order! I will have order in this court." When relative quiet returned, Whitney was on his feet. "This is preposterous. Mr. Harrison is the grieving widower. He hired me to prosecute this case. He would not kill his own wife." "Would he not?" Isaac said. "Your Honor, I would like to call my next witness." "I request that the court summon Mr. Charles Harrison himself." "Mr. Harrison is not in town," Whitney protested. "He has returned to Santa Fe on business." "Actually," Sheriff Porter said, standing, "I took the liberty of sending a deputy to fetch him this morning after Anderson brought Fletcher in. He is waiting outside." Charles Harrison entered the courtroom like he owned it, which in a sense he did. He was a powerfully built man in his 50s, with silver-shot hair and the kind of confidence that comes from money and influence. He looked at Fletcher with undisguised contempt before taking the witness stand. Isaac approached him carefully. "Mr. Harrison, I am sorry for your loss." "Thank you," Harrison said curtly. "Though I fail to see why I have been dragged here. The killer is sitting right there." He pointed at Fletcher. "Mr. Fletcher claims you hired him to poison your wife. How do you respond to that accusation?" "It is a lie told by a desperate man trying to save his own neck. I was in Santa Fe when my wife died. I have witnesses who can attest to my presence there." "I do not doubt you were in Santa Fe," Isaac said. "That was the point, was it not? To be far away when the crime occurred, to have an alibi." Harrison's jaw tightened. "You are grasping at straws, Cowboy. I have nothing more to say without my lawyer present." "Then perhaps you can explain this." Isaac pulled another piece of paper from his pocket. "This is a bank record from the White Oaks Bank showing that you withdrew $500 in cash 3 weeks ago. The exact amount found in Fletcher's possession. An unusual withdrawal for a man of your wealth, who typically conducts business through bank drafts and checks." "I needed cash for various purposes. That proves nothing. Combined with Fletcher's testimony, it proves quite a bit, but let me present one more piece of evidence." Isaac looked at Judge Pemberton. "Your Honor, I took the liberty of bringing in a handwriting expert from Santa Fe. Mr. Jeremiah Cole has examined the threatening letter found in Fletcher's possession and compared it to known samples of Mr. Harrison's handwriting. I would like him to present his findings." An elderly man with spectacles stood from the gallery and approached the judge's bench. He examined both the letter and several business documents belonging to Harrison, using a magnifying glass to compare specific letter forms and flourishes. After several tense minutes, Mr. Cole announced, "In my professional opinion, The letter and the business documents were written by the same hand. The distinctive way the writer forms his capital letters, particularly the T and P, is identical. The slant and pressure of the pen strokes match perfectly. I would testify under oath that Mr. Charles Harrison wrote the letter found in Mr. Fletcher's possession. The courtroom exploded again. Harrison lunged from the witness stand, but Sheriff Porter and 2 deputies were ready, restraining him quickly. "You have no idea what you have done," Harrison shouted at Isaac. "My wife was going to throw away our fortune on schools for Mexican children. She was going to ruin everything I built." I had no choice. In his rage, Harrison had confessed. The judge's gavel banged repeatedly as deputies dragged the struggling man toward the cells where Natalie had spent the last 3 days. The irony was not lost on her. Judge Pemberton called for order one final time. When the chaos finally subsided, he looked at Natalie with something like apology in his eyes. "Miss Natalie Kendrick, in light of the testimony and evidence presented here today, I find you not guilty of all charges. You are free to go, and you have this court's apologies for the ordeal you have suffered." Natalie stood on shaking legs, barely able to process what had just happened. Free. She was free. Not only free, but vindicated, her innocence proven before the entire town. She turned to look at Isaac and found him already moving toward her. "You did it," she said, her voice breaking. "You saved my life." "Justice saved your life," Isaac said, but his eyes were warm. "I merely presented the truth." Before Natalie could respond, people began crowding around her. Women from church apologized for doubting her. Men tipped their hats respectfully. The owner of the bakery where she worked, Mr. Schmidt, pushed through the crowd to tell her she still had a job waiting for her whenever she was ready to return. Through it all, Natalie remained aware of Isaac's steady presence beside her. He did not leave, did not disappear into the crowd, just stayed close like a guardian. When the press of people finally eased and she could breathe again, she turned to him. "I need to speak with you privately," she said. They walked out of the courthouse together into the bright New Mexico sunshine. The noose that had haunted Natalie's nightmares was gone from outside the jailhouse, already taken down. The town looked exactly the same as it had 4 days ago, but Natalie felt transformed. She had been through fire and emerged alive. They found a quiet spot at the edge of town, near a small grove of cottonwood trees that offered shade from the relentless sun. Natalie leaned against one of the trees, suddenly exhausted now that the adrenaline was fading. "I do not know how to thank you," she said. "You did not have to involve yourself in my troubles. You could have let justice take its course, let the system work as it would. But you chose to fight for me, a woman you barely know." "Why?" Isaac removed his hat, running a hand through his dark hair. "I have been thinking about how to answer that question since the moment Sheriff Porter let me into the jail to see you. The truth is, I had noticed you before all of this happened. At church, around town, at the bakery. I noticed your kindness, the way you always had a gentle word for the children, how you worked hard without complaint. I noticed you, Natalie, in a way I have not noticed anyone in a very long time." Hearing her given name on his lips sent a shiver through her despite the heat. "I did not know I had been seen," she said softly. "You have been. By me, at least. And when I heard you had been arrested, something in me could not accept it. I know human nature well enough to recognize goodness when I see it, and I saw it in you. I could not stand by and watch an innocent woman hang because it was convenient, because it tied up the case neatly." He stepped closer, close enough that she could see gold flecks in his dark eyes. "So, I involved myself, and I would do it again without hesitation." Natalie felt tears sliding down her cheeks, the release of 3 days of terror and the overwhelming emotion of being seen, truly seen by another person. "I noticed you too," she admitted. "In church, I mean. You always sat in the back, always left before anyone could speak to you." "I thought perhaps you preferred solitude." "I prefer peace," Isaac corrected. "There is a difference. Solitude is the absence of people. Peace is the presence of the right ones." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently wiped a tear from her cheek with his thumb. "I would very much like to know you better, Natalie Kendrick. If you would permit me to call on you properly, I mean. I know your reputation has been restored, but mine is just that of a simple ranch hand. I cannot offer you much beyond honest work and honest feeling." "That is more than most can offer," Natalie said, placing her hand over his where it still rested against her cheek. "I would be honored to receive your calls, Isaac Anderson." They stood like that for a long moment, the New Mexico sun beating down, the sound of the town continuing its business in the distance, two people finding each other in the aftermath of darkness. The next few weeks passed in a golden haze for Natalie. She returned to work at the bakery, where business actually increased as curious townspeople came in to meet the woman who had nearly been hanged for a crime she did not commit. She bore their questions and stares with grace, understanding that she had become part of White Oak's history, a story that would be told for years to come. But the best part of each day was when Isaac would arrive after finishing his work at the Circle T Ranch. He would clean up at the boarding house where he rented a room, change into his better clothes, and come to call on her at the small house she rented behind the general store. They would sit on her tiny porch and talk for hours, learning each other's stories, sharing dreams and fears and the small observations that make up a life. Natalie learned that Isaac had come to New Mexico from Texas 3 years ago after his parents died in a flash flood. He had a sister in San Antonio who was married with children, but they corresponded infrequently. He loved working with horses, had a natural gift with them that made him valuable to any ranch. He was 29 years old, had never been married, and believed in speaking plain truth even when it was difficult. Isaac learned that Natalie had left Missouri with dreams of becoming a teacher, but those dreams had faded when she realized she lacked the education and means to pursue that path. She loved books, could often be found reading by candlelight late into the night. She was 22 years old, had received 2 marriage proposals in White Oaks before the trial, and had turned both down because they felt more like business transactions than matters of the heart. What would a proposal from the heart look like? Isaac asked one evening as they watched the sun set over the distant mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Natalie considered the question carefully. "It would be honest," she said finally. "Not about what I could provide or what practical advantages the union might offer, but about genuine feeling between two people. It would be about wanting to build a life together, face whatever comes together, because being alone seems impossible once you have found that person." "That sounds about right," Isaac said quietly, and something in his tone made Natalie's heart beat faster. They were not alone in noticing their growing attachment. Mrs. Schmidt, the baker's wife, made knowing comments about young love. Reverend Thomas, who led the Sunday services, smiled approvingly when he saw them sitting together in church, Isaac having moved from the back pew to sit beside Natalie in her usual spot. Even Sheriff Porter, who had developed a grandfatherly affection for Natalie after the trial, mentioned that Isaac was a good man, steady and true. Charles Harrison's trial took place 6 weeks after Natalie's exoneration. The evidence against him was overwhelming between Fletcher's testimony, the handwriting analysis, and his own shouted confession in court. He was found guilty of murder and conspiracy to commit murder. Fletcher, for his cooperation, received a sentence of 10 years in prison rather than hanging. Harrison was sentenced to hang. Natalie did not attend Harrison's execution. She had seen enough of death and injustice. But she did visit Margaret Harrison's grave, laying wildflowers on the headstone and saying a quiet prayer for the woman who had shown her kindness. She liked to think Margaret would have approved of how things had turned out, of Isaac's pursuit of truth on Natalie's behalf. It was at Margaret's grave that Isaac found her one evening in late October, 2 months after the trial. The air had cooled, autumn finally bringing relief from the brutal summer heat. Natalie looked up as she heard his boots on the path and smiled. "I thought I might find you here," he said. "I wanted to tell her thank you. In a way, her death brought you into my life." That feels wrong to say, that anything good could come from such a tragedy, but I cannot help feeling it. Isaac knelt beside her in front of the grave. "I think she would understand. Mrs. Harrison struck me as the kind of woman who believed in finding light even in darkness." They stood together, and Isaac offered his arm as they walked back toward town. The evening was beautiful, the sky turning that particular shade of deep blue that only seems to exist in the high desert. When they reached Natalie's porch, instead of sitting in their usual chairs, Isaac turned to face her. "Natalie, I have been working extra hours at the ranch, taking on additional responsibilities. Mr. Thompson has offered me a position as foreman, which comes with better pay and a house on the property. It is not much, just 3 rooms, but it is solid and has a good roof. There is even a small garden plot where you could grow vegetables or flowers." Natalie's breath caught. She knew what was coming, could feel it in the air between them like the electricity before a lightning strike. "I know we have only been courting for 2 months, Isaac continued. "Some would say that is too soon to be certain of anything. But I have been alive long enough to recognize something real when I find it, and this is real, Natalie. What I feel for you is real. You are strong and kind and brave. You see the world clearly but choose goodness anyway, and I want to spend my life being the man worthy of your regard." He took both her hands in his, and Natalie felt tears gathering in her eyes for the 100th time since meeting Isaac, but these were tears of joy. "I am asking you to marry me," he said simply. "To take a chance on a future with a simple ranch foreman who loves you more than he thought possible to love another person. I cannot promise you riches or an easy life, but I can promise you honesty, loyalty, and every bit of my heart for all the days I have left on this earth. Will you marry me, Natalie Kendrick?" "Yes," Natalie said, the word coming out as half laugh, half sob. "Yes, Isaac Anderson, I will marry you. I love you, and I want nothing more than to build a life with you." Isaac pulled her into his arms, and they held each other as the stars began appearing in the darkening sky. When he finally pulled back, it was to cup her face in his hands and kiss her, gentle and reverent, a kiss full of promise and hope. They were married 3 weeks later in the White Oaks Church, on a crisp November morning with the sun streaming through the windows. Natalie wore a simple blue dress that Mrs. Schmidt had helped her make, with lace at the collar and cuffs. Isaac wore a new suit, his hair neatly trimmed, looking more nervous than he had even in the courtroom facing down a murderer. Reverend Thomas performed the ceremony, speaking about love and commitment, about 2 people becoming one family, about the blessing of finding your other half in this difficult world. When Isaac slipped a simple gold band onto Natalie's finger, his hands were shaking. When Natalie repeated her vows, her voice was clear and strong, every word a promise she intended to keep. The whole town turned out for the wedding and the celebration afterward. The Schmidts provided bread and pastries. Mrs. Chen, who had been Margaret Harrison's housekeeper and had spoken on Natalie's behalf during the investigation, brought traditional Chinese dumplings. Someone brought a fiddle, someone else a guitar, and soon there was music and dancing in the street outside the church. Natalie danced with Isaac, his arms around her waist, her head resting against his shoulder, and felt a happiness so complete it almost frightened her. How quickly life could change. 3 months ago, she had been facing death. Now she was married to a man who loved her, surrounded by a community that had come to respect her, beginning a new chapter of her life. "Happy, Mrs. Anderson," Isaac murmured against her ear. "Happier than I knew was possible," she replied honestly. They moved into the foreman's house on the Circle T ranch the day after the wedding. It was small but well built, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, a bedroom, and a small extra room that could serve as storage or, someday, a nursery. The house sat on a slight rise overlooking the ranch's main operations, with a view of the mountains in the distance. Natalie had few possessions to bring, mostly clothes and her precious collection of books. Isaac helped her arrange everything, insisting she should make the house feel like hers, like theirs. She hung curtains in the windows, placed wildflowers in a jar on the table, arranged her books on a shelf Isaac built for her. That first night as husband and wife, they lay together in bed and talked about the future. Isaac wanted to eventually save enough to buy their own small ranch. Natalie wanted to start a lending library, collecting books that people in the area could borrow. They both wanted children, a family to fill the house with laughter and love. "I never thought I would have this," Natalie confessed in the darkness. "After my parents died, I felt so alone. I thought that was just how life would be, that I would always be on the margins, always looking in at other people's happiness but never having my own." "You are not alone anymore," Isaac said, pulling her closer. "You are seen, you are known, and you are loved. I will make sure you never doubt that." The first year of their marriage was one of adjustment and deepening love. Natalie learned the rhythms of ranch life, the early mornings and physical labor, the way weather and season dictated everything. She started taking in mending and sewing to contribute to their household income, her neat stitches and fair prices making her services much in demand. Isaac thrived as foreman, proving himself capable and fair with the ranch hands. Mr. Thompson, the ranch owner, increased his wages twice that first year, pleased with the improvements Isaac implemented. The other ranch hands respected Isaac because he never asked them to do anything he would not do himself, working alongside them even as he directed operations. They made friends among the other ranch families. There was Martin and Sophie Garza, who ran the ranch's horse breeding program with their 3 boisterous sons. There was elderly John Whitaker, who managed the cattle with his wife Patricia, who became Natalie's closest friend. There was young Johnny Morrison, the former deputy who had taken a job at the Circle T after deciding law enforcement was not for him. On their first anniversary, Isaac surprised Natalie with a trip to Santa Fe. They stayed in a modest hotel and spent 2 days exploring the city, visiting shops and restaurants, marveling at the mix of cultures and architecture. Isaac bought Natalie 3 new books from a bookshop, and she bought him a fine leather belt with silver buckles. But the best gift came the night they returned home. Natalie had been feeling unwell for a few weeks, tired and queasy in the mornings. Patricia Whitaker, who had raised 5 children, had guessed the truth before Natalie herself realized it. "I am with child," Natalie told Isaac as they sat on their porch watching the sunset. "Patricia helped me confirm it. We are going to have a baby." Isaac's face went through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, disbelief, and finally pure joy. He picked Natalie up and spun her around, laughing, before carefully setting her down and apologizing for being too rough. "We are going to be parents," he said wonderingly. "Natalie, We are going to have a family." "We already are a family," she corrected, placing his hand on her still flat stomach. "But yes, we are going to grow." Their son was born in the summer of 1880, delivered by Patricia Whittaker with Sophie Garza assisting. It was a long, difficult labor that left Isaac pacing outside for hours, helpless and terrified. But when Patricia finally called him in and placed the squalling infant in his arms, all that terror transformed into overwhelming love. They named him James, after Natalie's father. He had Isaac's dark hair and Natalie's gray eyes, a perfect combination of both parents. Isaac was a devoted father from the first moment, changing diapers without complaint, walking the floor at night when James had colic, singing off-key lullabies that somehow always made the baby smile. Natalie watched her husband with their son and fell in love with him all over again, seeing a tenderness in Isaac that he showed to no one else. He was still the strong, steady man who had saved her life in that courtroom, but he was also this: gentle hands cradling a tiny head, soft words whispered to soothe a fussy baby, endless patience with sleepless nights. When James was 6 months old, Sheriff Porter came to visit, making the ride out to the Circle T on official business. Natalie, who still felt a complicated mix of gratitude and residual fear when she saw the lawman, invited him in for coffee. "I wanted you folks to know that Charles Harrison was hanged last week in Santa Fe," Porter said without preamble. "His appeals ran out. I thought you deserved to know that chapter is finally, completely closed." Natalie looked at Isaac, who reached over and took her hand. "Thank you for telling us, Sheriff," she said. "I will not lie and say I am glad a man is dead, but I am glad justice was served." "You are a better person than most, Mrs. Anderson," Porter said. "A lesser woman would have become bitter after what you went through. But from what I hear, you have built a good life out here, helped a lot of folks with your sewing and your kind heart." After the sheriff left, Natalie sat on the porch with James in her lap, watching Isaac work with one of the young horses in the corral. She thought about everything that had led her to this moment. Her parents' deaths, the journey west, the accusation and trial, Isaac's intervention, their marriage, and now their son. Life was strange and unpredictable. She had come so close to death, had felt the noose waiting for her, and now here she was, more alive than she had ever been, surrounded by love and purpose. The years passed with the steady rhythm of ranch life. James grew from baby to toddler to young boy, strong and curious, equally comfortable helping his father with horses or sitting with his mother while she read aloud from books. When he was 3, Natalie gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after the woman whose death had paradoxically given Natalie life by bringing Isaac into her world. Margaret was a sunny, laughing child with Natalie's gray eyes and a personality that charmed everyone she met. Isaac doted on his daughter, firm believers that ranch life did not mean daughters could not be as capable as sons. By the time Margaret was 5, she could ride as well as her brother, handle ranch tools, and help with various tasks around the property. In 1885, 7 years after their marriage, Isaac and Natalie finally achieved their dream of buying their own ranch. It was a small property about 10 miles from White Oaks, with good water and decent grazing land. Mr. Thompson, who had become not just an employer but a genuine friend, gave Isaac a generous bonus and sold them a breeding pair of horses at a fair price to help them get started. The ranch house was larger than the foreman's cottage had been, with 4 bedrooms and a wraparound porch. Natalie finally had space for the lending library she had dreamed of, converting one bedroom into a library room with shelves Isaac built along every wall. Word spread, and soon people from White Oaks and surrounding ranches were borrowing books, sometimes riding significant distances to access Natalie's growing collection. Isaac specialized in breeding and training horses, developing a reputation for producing animals that were both strong and even-tempered. Ranchers and the cavalry alike sought out Anderson horses, willing to pay premium prices for Isaac's work. The ranch, which they named the Two Hearts Ranch, became increasingly prosperous. Life was not without its challenges. There were years when drought threatened their livelihood, when Natalie had to carefully ration water and pray for rain. There were harsh winters when they lost livestock to cold and wolves. There was the year when James, at age 8, fell from a horse and broke his arm, giving both parents a terrible scare. There was the smaller worry of living so far from town, the isolation that sometimes weighed on Natalie even as she loved the land. But through every challenge, Natalie and Isaac faced things together, their partnership growing stronger with each passing year. They developed the kind of shorthand that long-married couples have, able to communicate with a glance, finishing each other's thoughts, working in tandem without needing to discuss every detail. On their 10th anniversary, they took a rare evening alone, Patricia Whittaker having agreed to watch James and Margaret overnight. They rode out to a high point on their property where they could see for miles in every direction, the mountains purple in the distance, the valley spread below them like a promise. You ever think about that day in the courthouse? Natalie asked, leaning against Isaac's chest as they sat together on a blanket, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. Sometimes, Isaac admitted, I think about how close we came to never having this. If I had not been at the Harrison house that day, if I had not seen that man go up the stairs, if I had decided it was not my business to interfere, you might have hanged for a crime you did not commit. You would have interfered, Natalie said with certainty. That is who you are, Isaac. You cannot see injustice and stay silent. Maybe. But I am grateful I was in the right place at the right time. Everything I value in this world, everything that matters to me, came from that moment when I chose to speak up. He kissed the top of her head. You, James, Margaret, this ranch, our life together. It all started with believing in your innocence. It started with you seeing me, Natalie corrected. Really seeing me, not as a convenient scapegoat or a poor baker's assistant, but as a person deserving of justice and dignity. That gift you gave me of being truly seen, that is what changed everything. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the night settling around them. Then Natalie turned in Isaac's arms to face him. I am with child again, she said, smiling at his startled expression. I wanted to tell you here in this place that is ours, that we built together. Isaac's face split into that huge grin she loved, the one that made him look years younger. Another baby, truly, truly. Patricia thinks perhaps twins, given how sick I have been and how quickly I am showing. Can you imagine? 2 more little ones to chase after James and Margaret. I can imagine anything with you, Isaac said, pulling her into a kiss. You have given me more happiness than I knew existed in this world. If we have twins, we will handle it. If we have 10 more children, we will figure it out together. As it turned out, Patricia was right. Natalie gave birth to twin boys in the spring of 1888, identical down to their dark hair and serious expressions. They named them Thomas and Samuel, and their arrival turned the Anderson household into cheerful chaos. James, now 10, proved himself a responsible older brother, helping watch his younger siblings with a patience that made both parents proud. Margaret, at 8, appointed herself the twins' protector and entertainer, constantly singing to them or making funny faces to provoke their rare smiles. The ranch continued to prosper. Isaac hired 2 ranch hands to help with the increased workload, young men from White Oaks who needed jobs and proved themselves hardworking and reliable. Natalie's lending library expanded to over 300 volumes, making it the largest collection of books in the county. She had regular visitors who would stay for hours, selecting books and discussing what they had read, turning the library into an informal gathering place. In 1890, White Oaks experienced a boom as more silver was discovered, and the population swelled with miners and their families. Natalie saw an opportunity and made a proposal to the town council. She would organize a proper school if the town would provide a building. The council agreed, and Natalie found herself achieving the dream she had once thought impossible, becoming a teacher. She taught 3 days a week, riding into town with James and Margaret, who were her students along with 20 other children of varying ages. Isaac supported her completely, adjusting his work schedule to be home with the twins on teaching days, never once suggesting that her place was only at home. The school thrived under Natalie's guidance. She taught reading, writing, arithmetic, history, and science, but also emphasized kindness and critical thinking. She shared her story with older students, using her experience to teach about justice, the importance of evidence, and the dangers of rushing to judgment. Some of her students went on to university, an unusual achievement for children from a small frontier town. Years passed in this rich, full life. James grew into a young man who looked so much like Isaac that it sometimes startled Natalie. At 18, he was as skilled with horses as his father and had begun courting a rancher's daughter from a neighboring property. Margaret, at 16, was sharp-witted and independent, talking about becoming a lawyer after witnessing the power of law both to harm and heal through her mother's story. The twins, now 8, were still inseparable, finishing each other's sentences and communicating in their own private language. On their 20th anniversary, the entire family gathered at the ranch house for a celebration. James brought his sweetheart, shy Mary Collins, who Natalie already loved like a daughter. Patricia and John Whitaker came, now in their 70s but still spry. The Garza family arrived with their now grown sons and various grandchildren. Sheriff Porter, retired but still living in White Oaks, made the journey. Even Mr. Thompson from the Circle T came, bringing his new wife and their young children. After dinner, as people relaxed on the porch watching the sun set, Patricia pulled Natalie aside. "I remember the first time I met you," the older woman said. "Right after your trial, you were so thin and shaken like a frightened bird. Look at you now. Look at what you have built." Natalie surveyed her domain, the thriving ranch, the house full of love and laughter, her children healthy and happy, her husband still the steady anchor of her life. "I had help," she said. "I had Isaac, and I had friends like you who believed in me." "You had courage," Patricia corrected. "You faced death and came out the other side determined to live fully. Not everyone can do that." That night, after the guests had left and the children were in bed, Natalie and Isaac sat together on their porch as they had done countless times over the years. Isaac's hair was now threaded with silver, and Natalie had laugh lines around her eyes, but they still reached for each other with the same instinctive need they had felt from the beginning. 20 years, Isaac mused. 20 years since I stood in that courthouse and fought for you. Best decision I ever made. The best decision you made was believing in me before you knew the truth, Natalie said. You took it on faith that I was innocent, trusted your instincts about my character. Not many people would have done that. I knew what I saw. You had a good heart, and good hearts do not poison kindly old ladies. Isaac pulled her close, and Natalie rested her head on his shoulder, breathing in the familiar scent of him. leather and sage and home. I love you, Natalie Anderson. I loved you when you were a frightened woman in a jail cell. I loved you when you became my wife. I loved you when you gave me children, and I will love you until my last breath leaves my body. I love you too, Natalie said, tears sliding down her cheeks as they still did when emotion overwhelmed her. You saved my life in every way a person can be saved. You gave me justice. You gave me love. You gave me a family and a purpose. Everything good in my life traces back to you. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge, the same stars that had watched over them for 20 years of marriage, 40+ years of life, countless moments of joy and struggle and everyday grace. As the years continued to pass, the Anderson Ranch became something of a legend in the area. People pointed it out to visitors. That was where the woman who was nearly hanged for murder lived, the woman whose cowboy husband proved her innocence and then married her. The story had grown in the telling, as stories do, becoming more dramatic with each retelling. But the core remained true. Natalie had been innocent, Isaac had saved her, and they had built something beautiful from the ashes of injustice. James married Mary Collins when he was 20, and they built a house on the Anderson property, working the ranch alongside Isaac. Their first child, a daughter they named Natalie, arrived a year later, making Natalie and Isaac grandparents for the first time. The joy of holding her granddaughter, seeing her son become a father, was almost more than Natalie could process. Margaret pursued her dream of becoming a lawyer, one of the first women to do so in New Mexico. She studied in Santa Fe and then returned to White Oaks to open a practice, specializing in defending people who could not afford representation. She never married, claiming she was too busy with her work, but she was deeply loved by her family and the countless clients whose lives she changed. The twins, Thomas and Samuel, went into business together, opening a horse trading operation that took them all over the Southwest. They never stayed in one place long, always chasing the next opportunity, but they came home to the ranch several times a year, bringing stories of their adventures. In 1900, as the new century began, Isaac and Natalie celebrated their 22nd anniversary quietly, both of them moving a bit slower than they once had but still devoted to each other. They were sitting on the porch, as had become their ritual, when Isaac said something that surprised Natalie. "I have been thinking about the future," he said. "Not our future, but the future of all this." He gestured at the ranch spread before them. "James will take over the ranch operations. That has always been the plan, but I want to make sure your library continues, that the school continues. I want to establish a fund that ensures there will always be books for people to read and education for children who want to learn." "That is a beautiful thought," Natalie said. "Education and access to knowledge saved me in many ways. When I was at my lowest after my parents died, books were my companions, and teaching has given me such purpose. I would love to know those opportunities will continue for others." They worked with a lawyer in Santa Fe, ironically Margaret herself, to establish the Anderson Educational Fund. They donated a significant portion of their savings and made arrangements for ongoing contributions from the ranch's profits. The fund would support the White Oaks School, provide scholarships for students seeking higher education, and maintain the lending library in perpetuity. At the ceremony establishing the fund, Natalie gave a short speech to the assembled townspeople. She was 64 years old now, her hair silver, her hands marked by years of work, but her voice was still strong. "When I was 22 years old, I stood accused of a crime I did not commit. I faced death because circumstantial evidence and rush to judgment nearly led to a terrible injustice. I was saved by one man's commitment to truth and by a legal system that, when allowed to work properly, can protect the innocent. She looked at Isaac, who stood to one side with their children and grandchildren. But I was also saved by education, the ability to think clearly, to examine evidence, to ask questions. These are not just academic skills. They are life skills. They are democracy skills. They are justice skills. She paused, letting her words settle. This fund is established to ensure that no child in this community lacks access to education due to poverty, that no curious mind goes unfed due to lack of books, that the next generation will be better equipped than ours to seek truth and resist the easy comfort of prejudice and assumption. That is my legacy, and I am proud to offer it. The applause was thunderous. People who had once viewed Natalie as an outsider, who had been ready to see her hang, now stood and cheered for her. Time and her actions had transformed their opinion, proving that redemption and change were possible. That night, exhausted but happy, Natalie lay in bed beside Isaac. "We have done well," she said softly. "Haven't we? We have lived good lives, raised good children, tried to make the world a little better." "We have done more than well," Isaac said, pulling her close. "We have done exactly what we were meant to do. We found each other, built a life together, and tried to pass on something worthwhile. That is all anyone can hope for." Natalie drifted to sleep in her husband's arms, as she had done for over 2 decades, feeling safe and loved and grateful for every moment. Isaac passed away in 1902 at the age of 53, his heart giving out suddenly while working with a young horse. It was quick, peaceful, exactly as he would have wanted, but it shattered Natalie. She had known him for 24 years, been married to him for 22, built every aspect of her adult life around their partnership. His absence left a hole nothing could fill. Her children rallied around her, James and Mary moving into the main house so she would not be alone, Margaret taking leave from her practice to spend several weeks at the ranch, the twins postponing a business trip to stay nearby. They all understood that while they had lost a father, Natalie had lost the man who had saved her life, loved her completely, and given her everything good she had known. At the funeral, which drew people from all over the territory, Natalie stood beside Isaac's grave and spoke about the man she had loved. "Isaac Anderson was the best person I ever knew," she said simply. "He saw injustice and fought it. He saw me when I was invisible to others. He loved without condition and gave without expectation of return. He was a good husband, a good father, a good neighbor, and a good man. The world is poorer for his loss, but richer for having had him in it." She visited his grave every day for the first year, sitting on the bench James had built beside the headstone, talking to Isaac about the children, the ranch, the small events of her life. She knew he could not hear her, but the ritual brought comfort, a way of maintaining the connection that had sustained her for so long. Time softened the sharp edges of grief, though it never truly went away. Natalie continued teaching, continued running the library, continued being grandmother to a growing number of grandchildren. She found purpose in these activities, in being useful and needed. She never remarried. Several men expressed interest over the years, but Natalie could not imagine replacing Isaac. He had been her great love, the person who had proved that fairy tales could happen even in the harsh reality of the frontier. She was content to live out her remaining years as his widow, honoring his memory through her actions. In 1908, 30 years after her trial, Natalie was invited to speak at a women's suffrage meeting in Santa Fe. She was 70 years old, stooped with age but still sharp-minded. She spoke about justice, about the importance of women's voices in legal matters, about how she had been saved by a man but how women should not always have to rely on male rescuers. "We need women on juries," she told the assembled crowd. "We need women as lawyers and judges and lawmakers. Not because women are morally superior to men, but because justice requires diverse perspectives. My life was saved by one good man, but it was nearly taken by a system that excluded half the population from participation. We can do better." Margaret, who had arranged for her mother to speak, watched with pride. Her mother had transformed personal tragedy into advocacy, using her experience to argue for systemic change. Natalie lived to see women gain the right to vote in New Mexico in 1920, shortly after statehood. She was 82 years old, frail but determined when she cast her first ballot. James, now 50, and Margaret, now 48, accompanied her to the polling place. She filled out her ballot with shaking hands, marking her choices carefully, and placed it in the box with a sense of profound satisfaction. "Your father would have been proud of this day," she told her children as they walked slowly back to the wagon. "He believed in justice and equality, even when those were not popular positions." She lived 3 more years, passing peacefully in her sleep in 1923 at the age of 85. She was surrounded by family, her hand held by James, her other children and numerous grandchildren filling the room. Her last words were, "Tell Isaac I am coming home." The funeral was massive, drawing people from all over New Mexico and beyond. Former students spoke about her impact as a teacher. Clients of Margaret's shared how Natalie's story had inspired her daughter's legal career, which had in turn saved them. Townspeople remembered her kindness and her library. Family members shared personal memories of love and guidance. She was buried beside Isaac on a hill overlooking the ranch they had built together. The headstone read, "Natalie Kendrick Anderson, 1856–1923. Teacher, friend, wife, mother. She was innocent and love proved it." The Anderson Educational Fund continued for generations, sending countless young people to college, maintaining the library, supporting the school. The Two Hearts Ranch stayed in the family, worked by James and his descendants, a living monument to what Natalie and Isaac had built together. Their story became part of New Mexico's history, taught in schools as an example of frontier justice, wrongful accusation, and the power of one person's determination to seek truth. Historians wrote about the case, legal scholars analyzed the trial, but at its heart remained a simple story. A woman falsely accused, a man who believed in her, and the love that grew between them against all odds. In 1978, on the 100th anniversary of Natalie's trial, the town of White Oaks erected a monument in the town square. It showed 2 figures, a woman standing tall despite chains, and a man beside her holding what appeared to be documents. The inscription read, "In honor of Natalie Kendrick Anderson and Isaac Anderson. May we always seek truth, fight injustice, and believe in the possibility of love even in the darkest circumstances." Descendants of Natalie and Isaac attended the unveiling. 5 generations of Andersons who traced their existence back to that moment in a courthouse when Isaac had stood up and said, "I have information pertinent to this case." They understood that they owed their very lives to their great-great-grandparents' love story, born from tragedy but flowering into something beautiful and enduring. The legacy of Natalie and Isaac Anderson lived on in every student who benefited from the educational fund, every person who borrowed a book from the library that still bore Natalie's name, every time someone in White Oaks told the story of the woman who was nearly hanged and the cowboy who saved her. It lived on in the values they had instilled in their children: seek justice, love fully, live honestly, and never be silent in the face of injustice. Their love story, which began in the darkest moment of Natalie's life, had rippled outward in ways neither could have imagined, touching countless lives across generations. And in a very real sense, they never truly left the Two Hearts Ranch. On quiet evenings, when the sun set over the mountains and stars emerged in the vast New Mexico sky, people swore they could feel the presence of two souls who had loved deeply, lived fully, and left the world better than they found it. The story of Natalie and Isaac reminded everyone who heard it that even in the harshest environments, love could flourish. That one person's courage could change everything. That injustice could be fought and overcome. That from the ashes of tragedy, beautiful new life could grow. And that the bonds forged in adversity, tested by time, and strengthened by mutual devotion could last not just a lifetime, but forever, echoing through generations as a testament to the enduring power of love, truth, and faith in another human being.